What's the difference between a circle and a square? Before you answer, you should know that this was perhaps the single most important question faced by William Pedersen, an American architect in Shanghai. Halfway through constructing one of the world's tallest buildings, work had to stop so that it could be redesigned. A city, in fact an entire country, demanded that this circular opening become a square. Why? Well, the story of this skyscraper illustrates perhaps more than any other the symbolic power of tall buildings, how they can transcend the steel and concrete they're made of and become something of even greater meaning. This isn't just the story of a building, it's the story of the largest migration in human history, the story of the men who built modern-day China, the story of the race to become the world's next superpower. This is the Shanghai World Financial Center. Almost the world's tallest building.
The television studios looking on and 91,000 people inside Beijing's National Stadium when the lights darkened and the party was ready to begin.
The China of the 21st century has not been a country to shy away from grand statements, nor has it been shy at building lots and lots of enormous buildings. In just 2 decades, China built more than 8 times the number of skyscrapers that America constructed in a century. Today, the country has well over 3,300 skyscrapers that are 150 metres tall or taller. The United States has just under 900. Of the 10 tallest buildings in the world, 5 of them are in China. So why doesn't China have the tallest? Well, they very nearly and technically did. But to tell you that story, we have to take you back in time, before the megacities and the 3,000 skyscrapers, back to when China was a very different place.
Look at this devastating day for the market.
2 things happened at once. The American economy crashed,
The worst drop in Wall Street history.
and China's began to boom. In the US, it was called Black Monday. In a single day, the Dow Jones dropped 22% and $1.7 trillion was lost worldwide.
In the depressed economy that followed 1987 Wall Street stock market crash and the savings and loan crisis, the real estate investment was really drying up in the U.S. So large firms looked to new centers for business, and certainly China was emerging as one of those booming economies.
While much of the globe was flailing in the aftermath of Black Monday, China was booming. The country was opening up to international markets, while rural farmers and workers were moving to China's cities on a scale never before seen.
The migration from the late 1980s and through the 1990s, the largest migration in human history, about 300 million people. And so that modernization and urbanization process had to build an enormous amount of space of housing for business, for offices, and to compete on the world stage.
Cities were grown almost overnight. The future was being built, and it was being built fast.
Beijing was the political center. Shanghai was the future New York of China. But Shanghai didn't have enough space. On the other side of the river was industrial and rice paddies area that was rather barren, very marshy.
The urban design that had developed basically was to transform Pudong into an international office center. And the result of that was the inclusion of 80 office towers, the lowest of which was 40 stories in height. Of the 80 towers, 3 towers were to dominate. 3 were to be super towers.
In the early 90s, construction began on the Jin Mao building, the first of these super talls. The Oriental Pearl TV tower also topped off. This was the world that William Pedersen entered. It was a Shanghai on the verge of becoming the city as we know it today. But it wasn't quite there yet.
Well, I'm a biker. I've been a biker for 50 years, and Shanghai was a city of bicycles. It was so serene, just that quiet hum in the morning. The juxtaposition between that hum and what one experiences now is so profound.
Pedersen is the P in KPF, a major American architecture studio. Like many Americans at this time, he looked to Asia for work.
We've worked extensively in Korea, extensively in Japan, and extensively in China.
Pedersen was working with Japanese real estate tycoon Mori, one of the most powerful developers in the world, thanks to his family's business.
And he was negotiating with the city during all of that time. But once he had completed those negotiations, we started our work.
This relationship was fruitful on both sides. Pedersen needed work, and Mori needed skyscraper experts. The Jim Mao building, rising just across the road from where Pedersen was to build his own skyscraper, gave an idea of what a Chinese supertall could look like. The building was designed by Adrian Smith, another American architect in Shanghai, and it was modelled off Chinese pagodas. But Pedersen wanted his tower to be different. Architecture at this time was moving away from the postmodernism of the 80s and into a style we would now call neo-futurism. Postmodernism was all about referencing other styles in a playful way. It was a reaction against the minimalism that came about in the mid-century. It was eclectic and loud. Neo-futurism, it could be said, was itself a reaction against postmodernism. This style was more about seamless dynamic forms, clean lines and smooth surfaces. It was optimistic and looked to the future. At the drawing board, Pedersen broke down the concept of a skyscraper into its basic fundamentals. What does a skyscraper essentially do? It's there in the name. It connects us to the sky.
One was an earth symbol, which is essentially a square prism. And the other was the symbol of the sky, the symbol of heaven. And it was a circular disc, sort of a flattened donut shape, with a central hole in the middle of it. And the juxtaposition between those two represented a juxtaposition that we could illustrate architecturally in terms of lightness versus weight.
Pedersen put these two forms together, the square prism that represents Earth and the disc that represents the heavens, and that gave him the shape for his skyscraper. A circle seemed like the obvious solution. It was aesthetically pleasing and referenced not only the ancient Chinese symbol for the heavens, but the moon gate as well, a common architectural element in Chinese gardens. Now, the void at the top also served another function. It would trick the wind and allow it to pass through the skyscraper, making the building more stable during strong storms.
The building has a very specific orientation to the Oriental Pearl TV tower. The upper floors are exactly perpendicular to the axis of it. It's intended to be the negative of it.
A circle really was, by all accounts, perfect. The plans were submitted in 1993, and the review process was a little unusual. Now, getting the facts straight is really important to me, especially when it comes to grappling with the history of such an influential skyscraper. I need to know everything, the good, the bad, and the controversially circular. These days it's pretty easy to get caught up in just hearing one side of the story, which is why I like using straight arrow news. What many people don't realise is that the typical news algorithms don't always give us the full story. Half the time you can read two articles on the same topic, but come away with two completely different understandings of the situation. Whereas on Straight Arrow News, I know I'm just getting the facts, so I can then make up my own mind. There's no spin here, it's just clarity. One of the standout things of Straight Arrow News for me, and my pretty much favourite feature, is the Media Miss tool, which shows you which stories are being underreported by different sides of the political spectrum, so you can make sure you're definitely getting the full picture. If, like me, you want to stay informed without the noise, then download the Straight Arrow News app today. It massively helps us out when you guys take the time to go and check out our video sponsors, so please do that. Straight Arrow News is a great platform, I use it all the time, and it really is worth checking out. Okay, time to head back to Shanghai. Once the plans for the building were submitted, it began a review process. 14 professors of architecture were given just 30 minutes each to respond to the design. They would give their responses in Chinese. These responses would be translated into Japanese for Mori, then finally translated into English for Pedersen.
I'll never forget that meeting. I had shown this building to everybody, and everybody loved it, you know. So the first woman that began the critique, she was a lovely appearing woman, elderly, very sort of motherly figure. And she got up and she said, well, perhaps this building is acceptable, but it certainly isn't desirable.
And with that act of foreshadowing and a refusal to elaborate any further, the building was approved. The piles for the foundations were driven into the ground, and in 1995, it was full steam ahead. Then came 1997, and Asia had its own financial crisis.
Skyscrapers are always a response to the economy. China and all of these other places were taking off, but they then also suffered their own recession after 1997. So the paper tiger that was roaring began to recede. And there was a hiatus in construction that lasted until the early 2000s that affected the Shanghai World Financial Center.
When work finally resumed towards the end of 2001, the world was very different. The Petronas Towers had completed and taken the crown of the world's tallest building. Work on the next tallest building, Taipei 101, had also started. The race for the tallest was no longer between the East and West, but now firmly in Asia. And another world event had also made skyscrapers more important symbols.
Of course, the resumption of work on Shanghai World Financial Center came after 2001, that is 9/11, and the enormous tragedy of the destruction of the World Trade Center tower and the loss of those lives. And one thought for months after that event that there would be no more skyscrapers. That was widely predicted around the world. But meanwhile, the global march or ascent of skyscrapers continued, and there was practically no pause.
Skyscrapers were still a necessity for any major city, and the tragedy couldn't stop their construction. But the public was paying even closer attention to them now.
9/11 changed the entire building code in China, and the introduction of refuge floors, which we still don't have here in America.
Other changes came to the Shanghai World Financial Center too. It was to be even taller, 32 metres taller than originally intended. There was just one problem. The foundations had been laid to support the original height, not this new, higher and wider building.
The design of the structure was based on the bearing capacity of the piles that had been driven. Yet Mr. Mori wanted to increase the lateral width of the tower, and he wanted to increase the height of the tower by 40 meters.
The engineer who was entrusted with the new design was Les Robertson, who was the structural engineer for the World Trade Center. And Les Robertson, who was a dear friend and a brilliant engineer, came up with a solution that was able to answer the brief of the client.
The height and width of the building could be extended, but it would mean decreasing the overall weight of the skyscraper by 10%, so they could still use the existing foundations. Now, to reduce the building's weight, the structural system holding it up was rethought. Robertson replaced it with a diagonal braced frame with added outrigger trusses. The strength of these frames allowed them to reduce the thickness of the concrete walls in the core. This is where the building's lifts, stairwells, and utilities normally sit. They could also then decrease the weight of the structural steel in the perimeter walls. Now, this actually worked out pretty well for everybody. It made the construction process cheaper and faster, while Pedersen was able to incorporate the outrigger trusses into the overall design of the building. The new structural elements also meant there were less columns inside the building footprint, allowing for uninterrupted and unparalleled views of Shanghai. With this, work continued, but the city was keeping close watch. Soon, Pedersen and his team had to contend with one more pretty big problem: public outrage.
A newspaper column was written, "Japanese developer marches into Shanghai with a flag held high." Okay, we never even thought of it in those terms, but cultural sensitivity is a very extraordinary thing.
The Chinese public turned against the tower. They saw the circular void as a Japanese flag planted on the Shanghai skyline by a Japanese developer. It was only a few decades ago that the Japanese had occupied Shanghai and much of China during World War II.
Mr. Mori called me, wanted me to come over for a morning meeting in Tokyo with the deputy mayor of Shanghai. And we had this meeting. He explained, the deputy mayor explained that this was an anniversary of the end of the Second World War. There was great sensitivity in China at the time. So could you please do something?
Pedersen tried at first to save his design by adding a bridge that would disrupt the circle and make it look less like a Japanese flag. But that wasn't enough to appease the Chinese public.
The internet really started to take hold at that time, and the momentum just was too great. And so we were asked to reshape the form of the building. And I can certainly understand why. These buildings are so symbolic, and if the symbolism isn't right for the people, that isn't, we're not doing our job.
New plans were submitted in 2005, making the circle a square.
In every skyscraper, there always are conflicting factors of business and imagery and narrative and promotion, just as important to confusing the wind and the various engineering values. That open space also had an economic rationale by making the number of floor heights for the hotel that was in the top have an expanded footprint itself. So there were many reasons that came together in order to make that a logical solution.
The building finished, at long last, in 2008. It eclipsed the Petronas Towers, but could not beat the spire that had topped Taipei 101, the new tallest building in the world that had completed in 2004. It was still the tallest building in the world by roof height and by occupiable floor, but not by overall height.
Probably could have designed two spires going out from both edges of the building and going up. That's probably what we would have done had we been asked to. Mr. Mori was very much interested in having an elegant building. The issue of the world's tallest building never really was talked about very much. I don't know, maybe he anticipated that would be a very temporary objective.
Even if the moniker of the world's tallest building was incidental to the plans of the developer in the end, the tight race for the title in the late 90s and through the early 2000s shows just how massive the boom in skyscraper construction really was. A city capable of building such a structure is rare, and to have several at once competing is even rarer. It meant that this time saw incredible leaps in engineering and economic resources. But Mori was right. Holding the title would be a temporary one. Just a year later, the Burj Khalifa would complete with its incredible 244-metre spire topping it off, making it far and away the world's tallest building. Shanghai continued to grow. It's now home to 24 million people and 194 skyscrapers. It's a far cry from the city that Pedersen first visited in the early 1990s. Shanghai Tower now rises even higher next to both the Jim Mao building and the financial centre. Together, these three structures form the world's first adjacent grouping of three super tall skyscrapers.
The Shanghai Tower was built taller than ours and somewhat a deviation from the original intention. But that's how it goes. Mr. Mori was no nonsense. He built efficient building. The Shanghai Tower has a lot of space that is really of very questionable use. I think this building was probably designed more to be a showpiece. But I can't criticize it past that point.
The Chinese government has since introduced a ban on skyscrapers. Smaller cities are now limited to a height of 250 metres, though they can build higher than that in special circumstances. Larger cities are limited to a height of 500 metres, but again only in special circumstances. The moment China could have had the world's tallest building has passed, at least for now. The Shanghai World Financial Centre sits on the skyline as an iconic addition. It's been embraced by the people of the city and is even nicknamed the bottle opener because of its shape.
They aren't exactly complimentary names necessarily, but they connect the buildings to the people. In that sense, it's really good. People enjoy it, then I enjoy it too. I hope its legacy is that which we intended, to connect it through time. I hope people will see and understand why it was designed as it is designed. I'm very pleased you're interested in this building because it's been a great favorite of mine.
This video was sponsored by Straight Arrow News. You can learn more about that at the link below. Don't forget that we're inspiring the next generation of builders through our investment into Brickborrow, a fantastic LEGO subscription service. You can learn more and get started today over at brickborrow.com. And as always guys, if you enjoyed this video and you want to get more from the definitive video channel for construction, make sure you're subscribed to the B1M.